A king's despair. The oppressive silence of the moonlit den was a physical weight on Theron's chest. Rosalie, usually a vibrant spark of mischief, sat curled into herself on the worn wolfskin rug, her small frame racked with silent sobs. The scent of her mother, Elara, had vanished with the dawn, leaving only a hollow ache. Theron's own grief was a dull roar, but Rosalie's shattered spirit was a sharper agony. Her first shift ceremony, the most vital ritual of their coven, was barely a week away. How could she embrace her wolf when her heart was so broken? He needed her smile, her fierce joy, to return. He found Audrey in the dusty archives of the town library, her spectacles perched on her nose as she deciphered an ancient scroll. Her presence radiated a quiet warmth, a stark contrast to the glacial distance Elara had cultivated. Theron's voice, when he finally spoke, was raspy. "I need your help, Audrey. For 3 days, I need you to be my wife." Audrey's gaze, intelligent and curious, met his. "For Rosalie, I assume. What do you offer in return?" "Access to the Nocturne Codex," he stated, knowing it was her obsession. Her eyes gleamed. "Agreed." At the ceremony, the air thrummed with ancient magic. Rosalie, though subdued, held Audrey's hand tightly. When the sneering alpha from the rival pack, Kale, attempted to belittle Theron, Audrey's quiet composure and sharp wit deflected his barbs with effortless grace, earning a genuine, albeit fleeting, smile from Rosalie. But as the celebration waned, Theron saw the shadows returning to his daughter's eyes. "This lie is hurting her more than it's helping." Audrey confronted him later, her voice firm. "You must tell her the truth." Theron's jaw tightened. "The law dictates a memory alteration, to protect our secrets." His hand twitched, the power to erase her knowledge a chilling possibility. But he couldn't. Her integrity, her unwavering kindness, had already carved a space within him. "Truth is the only path to healing, Theron," Audrey insisted, her voice soft but unwavering. Together they sat with Rosalie. Theron, his voice heavy with regret, explained Elara's departure. Audrey, with gentle words, explained her own role. Rosalie's face crumpled. The betrayal of a second mother figure, even a temporary one, was a fresh wound. She cried until she was spent, but this time, Theron held her, and Audrey, instead of fleeing, sat beside them, a steady presence. Slowly, Rosalie's sobs lessened. Her small hand reached for Audrey's. "Will you still be my friend?" A fragile hope bloomed in Theron's chest. They were not bound by blood or title, but by choice, a new kind of family beginning to mend. A spark of connection. The lamplight cast long, dancing shadows across the inn's common room as Theron watched Rosalie, her face still etched with the hollow grief he'd come to know so well. He gripped his tankard, the wooden rim rough against his fingers. Then, a soft, melodic laugh floated across the room, and Rosalie, for the first time in weeks, genuinely smiled. She was speaking with Audrey, the town's eccentric historian, whose eyes sparkled with an infectious warmth. Audrey's stories, Theron noted, weren't about battles or ancient pacts, but about forgotten recipes and the peculiar habits of long-dead poets. It was a balm to Rosalie's fractured spirit. Later, Theron found Audrey poring over a dusty tome in a quiet corner. "I need your help," he rumbled, the desperation raw in his voice. "Just for 3 days. My daughter's ceremony approaches. She needs a mother presence. Will you pretend to be my wife?" Audrey looked up, her brow furrowed. Then a glint appeared in her eyes. "The scrolls of Ethelred," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Give me access to the Coven's library, specifically that text, and I'll play your part." Theron, caught between despair and hope, nodded. The day of the celebration arrived, a whirlwind of music and feasting. Rosalie, holding Audrey's hand, navigated the crowd with a newfound lightness. When Theron's rival, a sneering alpha from a neighboring coven, attempted to corner Rosalie with veiled threats, Audrey stepped forward, a deceptively gentle smile on her lips. "My husband and I are quite protective of our daughter," she purred. her gaze unwavering, effectively deflecting the threat without a single aggressive word. Theron felt a surge of pride, a strange warmth he hadn't anticipated. But as the days wore on, the lie began to chafe. Rosalie's attachment to Audrey deepened, her innocent questions about their shared past becoming harder to parry. Audrey confronted Theron one evening, the scent of wood smoke clinging to her clothes. "This isn't fair to her," she insisted, her voice quiet but firm. "The truth, Theron, is the only way." The moment Rosalie learned Audrey wasn't her mother, her world shattered anew. A piercing sob tore from her throat, echoing the pain of her earlier abandonment. Theron, bound by ancient law, reached for Audrey, his fangs itching, the compulsion to erase her memories almost overwhelming. But he couldn't. Her steady, knowing gaze held him. "Truth," she whispered, pulling his hand away from her temple. Together, they sat with Rosalie, explaining everything. The lies, the reasons, the desperate hope. Rosalie wept, but slowly, she began to listen. She looked at Audrey, no longer a mother, but a friend who had offered solace when she needed it most. The path ahead was uncertain, but as the new trio sat, not bound by blood or roles, but by choice, a fragile healing began. The impossible bargain. The musty aroma of aged parchment clung to Audrey like a second skin as she traced faded glyphs in the cavernous library. Theron's sudden appearance, a shadow detaching from the gloom, made her jump. His usual regal bearing was replaced by a desperate slump. His eyes, normally sharp as obsidian, held a pleading glint. "I need your help," he rasped, the words raw. "For Rosalie." He laid out the impossible bargain. 3 days, a masquerade, a mother for his shattered daughter. The thought of feigning affection, of invading such a vulnerable space, twisted in Audrey's gut. Yet, the image of Rosalie's small, pale face, glimpsed earlier in town, lingered. "A legendary text," Audrey said, her voice quiet but firm. "The ancient Umbran chronicles, unbound. For 3 days of my life." Theron's jaw tightened, a flicker of outrage in his eyes quickly extinguished by a deeper despair. Agreed. The celebration was a cacophony of music and laughter, a stark contrast to Rosalie's quiet demeanor. Audrey knelt, gently wiping a smudge of cake from the girl's cheek. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered, and a fragile smile touched Rosalie's lips. Later, when Lord Valerius, Theron's sneering rival, approached with thinly veiled insults, Audrey interjected smoothly, her wit a rapier against his blunt force, leaving him sputtering. Theron watched, a strange warmth blooming in his chest. But the facade began to crack. Rosalie's innocent trust, her small hand clutching Audrey's, became a leaden weight. One evening, as Rosalie slept, Audrey confronted Theron. "This lie is poisoning her," she stated, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "It has to stop." The truth, when it came, shattered the fragile peace. Rosalie's scream tore through the night, a sound of pure betrayal. Theron, his eyes blazing with ancient law, reached for Audrey, the power to erase memories gathering in his palms. But he couldn't. Her unflinching gaze, her quiet strength, stayed his hand. "Truth, Theron," Audrey urged, her voice steady. "It's the only way to heal." Together, they sat with Rosalie, piecing together the fractured narrative. Rosalie cried, raged, then slowly, hesitantly, allowed Audrey to hold her. The embrace wasn't born of blood or obligation, but of a shared understanding, a chosen kinship. The three of them, a new constellation, began to mend, not through the pretense of family, but through the honest work of friendship. Temporary family. The clatter of Theron's armor seemed to amplify the silence in the grand hall. Rosalie, usually a whirlwind of joy, sat slumped on a velvet cushion, her gaze fixed on the empty space her mother once occupied. Days had bled into weeks, each one duller than the last. He watched her, a knot tightening in his chest. Her coming-of-age ceremony loomed, a celebration now tinged with a hollow ache. He needed her smile back, needed it like air. He found Audrey amidst dusty tomes in the town's ancient library, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her laugh, light and genuine, had been the first true warmth Rosalie had experienced since the departure. Theron swallowed his pride. "Audrey," he began, his voice gravelly, "I need your assistance for 3 days at the ceremony. Pretend to be her mother." Audrey's eyes, the color of warm honey, widened. "Pretend? Theron, that's—" She trailed off, then a glint appeared. "The Chronicle of Eldoria. Can I see it?" He hesitated, the legendary text guarded for centuries. "Deal." At the ceremony, the air thrummed with nervous energy. Rosalie, a vision in moonspun silk, shivered despite the warmth of the firelight. Audrey, her arm a comforting weight around the girl's shoulders, whispered something, and a faint, fleeting smile touched Rosalie's lips. Later, when Lord Valerius, Theron's smirking rival, attempted to corner Rosalie, Audrey smoothly intercepted him, her wit sharper than any blade. Theron watched, a strange admiration stirring. But the fragile charade began to fray. Rosalie, clinging to Audrey, started asking questions, her small hands clutching at the illusion. "Mommy, are you staying this time?" Audrey's eyes met Theron's across the crowded hall, a silent accusation. Later, in the quiet of the night, she confronted him. "This is hurting her more." "The lie, Theron. It's poison." He bristled. "It's protection." "No," she countered, her voice firm. "It's a temporary bandage over a gaping wound." When Rosalie finally learned the truth, her small world shattered again. The scream that tore from her throat was a physical blow. Theron, driven by ancient law, reached for Audrey, his hand glowing with the power to erase her memories, to protect the Coven's secrets. But he couldn't. Her unwavering gaze held him, a silent plea. "Truth, Theron," Audrey whispered, "is the only path to healing." Together they sat with Rosalie. They spoke of loss, of love, of the fragile bonds that truly mattered. Rosalie wept, then slowly, hesitantly, she reached for Audrey's hand. The new trio, bound not by blood or forced roles, but by a shared vulnerability and burgeoning trust, began to mend, one slow, deliberate step at a time. The moon ceremony. The air thickened with the scent of moon petal and pine as the Umbra coven gathered. Rosalie, usually a whirlwind of laughter, stood beside Theron, her small hand clammy in his, her eyes downcast. The moon ceremony, a rite of passage for all young werewolves, was meant to be joyous. Instead, it felt like a funeral. Theron watched her, a hollow ache in his chest, remembering the bright sparkle her mother's departure had extinguished. Then Audrey appeared, a gentle presence in a borrowed ceremonial gown, her gaze finding Rosalie's. A small, tentative smile touched Rosalie's lips, a flicker of the old light. It was enough. Theron felt a surge of gratitude, a desperate hope. Audrey's warmth was a balm, and he saw Rosalie lean into her, a natural comfort blossoming between them. The coven leader, Lyra, began the ancient chanting. Theron's rival, Kale, a hulking figure with a sneer carved into his face, approached them. "A new queen, Theron? And so soon?" he rumbled, his eyes fixed on Audrey with suspicion. Audrey met his gaze, unflinching. "The Alphys family is his strength, Kale. Always." Her voice, steady and calm, held an unexpected steel. Kale, momentarily flustered, retreated, his challenge diffused. Theron felt a strange pride swell within him. Later, as the bonfire crackled, Audrey found Theron away from the revelry. "She thinks I'm her mother," Audrey stated, her voice quiet but firm. "This lie, Theron. It's hurting her more than you know." He flinched. "It was the only way to protect her, Audrey. Protection built on sand will always crumble," she countered, her eyes pleading. "The truth, however painful, is the only foundation." The thought of shattering Rosalie's fragile peace again twisted his gut. Werewolf law demanded he erase Audrey's memory of their deception. He reached for her, his power stirring, but his hand faltered. He couldn't. He simply couldn't. Audrey gently took his hand. Let's tell her together. Rosalie found them by the old oak, its leaves rustling secrets. Theron began, his voice rough. Audrey added her truth, explaining their arrangement, her genuine affection for Rosalie shining through. Tears welled in Rosalie's eyes, a silent tremor shaking her small frame as the illusion shattered. But Audrey held her, not as a mother, but as a steadfast friend. Slowly, Rosalie leaned into her, the tears still falling, yet a new, fragile acceptance blooming. Theron watched, a silent observer, as his daughter, and perhaps himself, began to heal. The weight of the lie, the familiar scent of pine and damp earth did little to soothe Theron's churning gut. Rosalie's small shoulders shook, her cries muffled against his chest, a stark contrast to the lively hum of the approaching solstice celebration. He yearned for the return of her bright, inquisitive gaze, now dimmed by the abrupt departure of her mother. The impending choosing ceremony, meant to be a joyous affirmation of her burgeoning power, felt like a cruel mockery. In the bustling town, amidst the vibrant stalls and musicians, Rosalie's gaze had snagged on Audrey, a whirlwind of auburn hair and infectious laughter, cataloging ancient scrolls. A strange warmth bloomed on Rosalie's face, a flicker of the old light. Desperation clawed at Theron. He approached Audrey, his voice a gravelly whisper. I need you to be my wife, for 3 days. For her. Audrey's eyes, the color of moss after rain, widened. Your wife. She'd agreed, her curiosity piqued by the promise of the legendary lycanthropic scrolls. At the celebration's peak, as the bonfire's embers danced, Rosalie clung to Audrey's hand, a genuine smile gracing her lips. Audrey's presence was a shield, deflecting the thinly veiled barbs of Kale, Theron's sneering rival. But later, as Rosalie slept, Audrey's voice was sharp. This lie, Theron, is a poison bomb. She's starting to believe it. The truth, when it tumbled out, Audrey wasn't her mother. Merely a stand-in shattered Rosalie's fragile composure. Her wails tore through the quiet night. Theron's claws extended, the ancient law screaming to erase Audrey's memory, to protect the coven's secrets. But his hand trembled, falling short. You can't, Audrey whispered, her eyes unwavering. The truth, Theron, is the only way. Together, under the vast, star-dusted sky, they told Rosalie everything. Audrey held her, not as a mother, but as a steadfast friend. Slowly, Rosalie's sobs subsided. A new, fragile thread began to weave itself between the three of them, not of blood or obligation, but of choice and burgeoning trust. Painful revelation. The chill evening air offered no solace to Theron's simmering frustration. Rosalie, her face blotchy from silent tears, had vanished into her room hours ago. He'd attempted to soothe her, to divert her with tales of their coven's triumphs. Yet her gaze remained distant, shadowed by a grief that seemed too profound for a child. He longed for the sound of her laughter, that bright spark extinguished with Alara's loss. Downstairs, the scent of burning logs mingled with the faint aroma of Audrey's herbal tea. She sat by the hearth, her brow furrowed in concentration as she traced patterns on a leather-bound tome. She's still not herself, is she? Audrey's voice was a soft caress, laced with genuine concern. Theron sank into a vast armchair, the worn velvet a familiar comfort against his weary frame. No. She clings to a hope, a falsehood. He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, a heavy sigh escaping him. This deception, Audrey, it's tearing her apart. Audrey closed the book, her gaze direct and unwavering. I warned you it would. Children intuit truth, Theron, even if they can't vocalize it. My presence, my affection for her, it rests on a foundation of deceit. She senses I'm not her mother. She feels it deep within her. His jaw tightened. And what precisely would you have me do? Let her shatter? Let her confront the world knowing her own mother abandoned her just before her coming of age. The raw desperation in his voice was palpable. Tell her the truth, Audrey stated simply. It's the only path forward. She'll hurt, yes, but it will be an honest wound, not this slow poison of confusion. A cold dread coiled in Theron's gut. The Coven law. He looked at Audrey, at her kind eyes, her gentle hands. Erasing her memory was the ancient way, the brutal, necessary act to preserve the secrecy of their kind. He possessed the power to do it, he knew. His might was immense. But the mere thought, it felt wrong. Felt like yet another betrayal. "I can't," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "I can't erase you, Audrey." A flicker of surprise, then understanding crossed her features. "Then let's face this together. Tell her everything. I'll be there." Later, Rosalie, her eyes wide and fragile as spun glass, sat between them. Theron's voice was gruff, thick with pain, as he explained. Audrey held her small hand, a silent anchor in the turbulent revelation. Rosalie wept, a wrenching, heartbroken sound. But then she looked at Audrey, a new question shining in her tear-filled gaze. "You're my friend." Audrey smiled, a genuine, warm light radiating from her. "Yes, Rosalie, I am." The fragile trio, bound not by blood or obligation, but by a shared, painful honesty, began their slow, arduous journey toward healing, truth, and forgiveness. The cool evening air did little to soothe the tremor in Rosalie's hand as she clutched a wilted wildflower. Audrey's presence beside her, a steady warmth, was a fragile anchor. "She's not coming back, is she?" Rosalie's voice, a mere whisper, cracked. Theron, observing from the porch, felt a fresh stab of helplessness. Audrey's gaze, soft and direct, met his. It was a silent accusation, a question of how much more the girl could bear. Later, as the moon climbed, casting long shadows, Audrey found Theron in his study, the air thick with the scent of old parchment. "This can't continue," she stated, her voice calm but firm. "The pretense is crushing her. She's clinging to a ghost, Theron." He clenched his fists. "What choice do I have? It's for her protection." Protection? Or avoidance? Audrey's eyes narrowed. "She deserves the truth, however painful. And I cannot be part of this lie any longer, not when it's hurting her so deeply." A primal growl rumbled in Theron's chest. The ancient law. Those who learned of their kind's secrets, especially those not of their blood, had their memories erased. His hand twitched, a faint glow emanating from his fingertips. Audrey didn't flinch. "You won't," she said, her voice unwavering. "Because you know it's wrong. Because you know she needs me to be real, not a convenient illusion." The glow faded. A sigh, heavy with centuries of regret, escaped him. "What do? "We tell her," Audrey said, stepping closer. "Together." The confession was agonizing. Rosalie's small face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as Audrey explained, gently, that she wasn't her mother, but a friend. Theron watched, his heart breaking anew. But this time, a flicker of hope mingled with the pain. When Rosalie, through her sobs, tentatively reached for Audrey's hand, a new path, paved not by deception but by shared vulnerability, began to emerge. A new beginning. The crisp morning air, redolent with pine and damp earth, offered a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension clinging to Theron's chambers. Rosalie, usually a whirlwind of youthful exuberance, sat hunched by the window, her finger idly tracing patterns on the frosty glass. Her ceremonial sash, a silk promise of her new womanhood, lay crumpled and forgotten on a nearby chair. Theron's gaze settled on her, a leaden weight of helplessness pressing against his ribs. "Rosalie," he began, his voice a gravelly whisper. She flinched, a subtle tremor, but remained facing the pain. The ensuing silence throbbed, louder than any shouted accusation. Later, amidst the boisterous clamor of the town square, Rosalie found herself drawn to Audrey's vibrant tapestry stall. Audrey's smile, a warm embrace, seemed to gently unspool some of the tightness coiling in the girl's shoulders. Hidden in a shadowed alcove, Theron observed, a flicker of Rosalie's former light catching his eye. Once Rosalie had drifted off, he approached Audrey, his proposition blunt and to the point. My daughter needs a mother, for 3 days, to see her smile again. Audrey's brow furrowed, her earlier warmth replaced by a thoughtful skepticism. And what, King Theron, do I gain? She inquired, her gaze unwavering. Unrestricted access to the scroll of lycanthropic lineages. A spark of intellectual hunger flared in Audrey's eyes. Agreed. At the ceremony, Audrey's presence was a soothing balm. Her laughter resonated easily, her hand a comforting anchor on Rosalie's back as the girl navigated the celebratory whirlwind. When Lord Valerius, Theron's long-standing rival, attempted to corner Rosalie with veiled barbs about her absent mother, Audrey intervened with seamless grace. Lord Valerius, she purred, her voice a silken thread woven with steel. Perhaps your condolences would be better directed towards the coven, rather than dissecting its grief. Valerius, caught off guard, retreated, his face a mottled flush. That night, however, Audrey sought Theron in his study. The lie is corroding her, she stated, her voice a low current. She's starting to believe it. The next morning, Rosalie practically bounced into the dining hall, a genuine smile, radiant after weeks of shadow, gracing her lips. Mother, can we ride through the Northwood after breakfast? Theron exchanged a pained glance with Audrey. Rosalie, Audrey began, her voice soft but resolute. There's something we need to tell you. The truth, when it finally unfurled, shattered the fragile peace. Rosalie's face crumpled, tears carving glistening paths down her cheeks as she bolted from the room. Theron found Audrey by the ancient oak, his hands clenching into fists. Werewolf law dictates, he growled, his fangs elongating. Erase the memory. Audrey stood her ground, her chin held high, defying his rage. You won't, because you know it's wrong. Her words, clear and unwavering, sliced through his fury. Truth is the only path forward, Theron. For her. Together, they discovered Rosalie huddled in her room. Theron knelt, his voice thick with remorse. Audrey sat beside her, her hand gently stroking Rosalie's hair. They explained everything, not as a monarch and a stranger, but as two individuals who cared profoundly for a young girl. Rosalie's sobs eventually subsided, replaced by quiet sniffles. She looked from Audrey to Theron. You're my friend, Audrey? She whispered. Audrey nodded, her eyes warm and steady. A new beginning, forged not by lineage but by choice, had tentatively unfurled its delicate petals.